Hello, everyone. Well, this has been a wild and crazy moment of lots and lots of surprises. And John and I and Garth decided to go ahead and record, and we will send out the replay to both of our lists. Uh, uh, what an amazing world. Can we trust the surprises? And so we are saying yes to the surprises and hoping that we are able to make this call happen. uh, and so let's take a moment and pause and breathe in the Holy Spirit and simply say, I am now in the presence of pure being. I am immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, of love, and of wisdom. And so we awaken and we acknowledge this presence and this power. Oh, blessed Spirit. Now erase, dissolve the human limitations that sometimes confuse us and surprise us and confound us. Dissolve that and come upon us with your pure substance of love, of joy, of wisdom. Bring into manifestation our world according to your perfect plan. And we simply breathe that in and say, thank you, Holy Spirit. Thank you, oh beloved one. And thank you for even the things that we don't understand when the time happens. They're guiding us in ways we do not understand. We do not yet know. And so it is. Wow. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, world. Whether you're listening to this live or whether you're listening to it on a recording, we are so glad you're here. It's very, very interesting. Our audiences for our live calls are not large, and it often will depend on moments in time, whether people are available or whether technology is working. And, and the other experience that is extremely powerful to me is that our replays are almost always listened to by 150 people to several hundred. And the largest number of replays that have been listened to was Swami Brahmananda, AKA, also known as David Now, whom I co-taught with for many, many years. So his team from India sends out the replays, and wow, the numbers just go up. Spirit has its way. Spirit has its way. And so I'm so glad to welcome you, beloved John Welshons, my beloved friend of so many years. Our lives have been uh, the example of beloved friendship for me. I always remember the words of Jesus when he said to the disciples, you call me teacher, I call you friend. So, John, you and I know that relationship of beloved friend and how beautiful it has been in my life, how enriching it has been, how enlightening it has been, how many times you have shown up when I was in moments of unknowing and immense grief, or as Meath Conlon used to call it, oh, Marj, you're just in the womb house. You're waiting for the new birth, and it will be coming. So, John, you have been part of my new birth on numerous occasions. And isn't that amazing that we are born again and again and again and again? And so I'm so looking forward to our conversation today. And in the email I sent, we had to postpone it one time. I said, there are times in our lives when we realize that we have been blessed to be in the presence of pure being. Sometimes the glimpse is immediate. Sometimes it takes years to realize that these moments have been part of an anointing, part of an anointing, like happens in the Catholic Church on Ash Wednesdays, part of an anointing of our own inner flame of love. And so a profound moment for me, and I'm so, so blessed that we're here together. So, John, I know we're going to follow the script that we often use involving the four acts of our life, although what I know is we're also going to shift from following a vertical timeline that starts with birth and goes to now and ends in what we call death on the human plane. We're going to move back and forth with that kind of holy experience of resurrection again and again. And we're going to talk about some of those experiences in your life and in my life. And so the first picture in the email that we sent out relates to feeling that call of the divine. And yet it's a picture that comes later in your life. And so we'll go back to the beginning. By the way, let me just let the folks know you are in the beginning stages of the fourth act of your life. You are 75, is that right, John?
Yes, yes.
Just turned 75. So you're still young as far as my timeline is concerned. You're uh, I will be turning 87 on my next birthday, which is next month. And so, being still at the beginning of your fourth act, we're going to do that shift uh, that moves us into timelessness, into the vertical dimensions where we can shift back and forth. And so the first link has to do with the question, have you felt the call of the divine? The first call I felt was when I was a child. And I had to hear the words, Jesus loves me, or Jesus, lover of my soul. It was a call, but I didn't understand it with my human mind. Have you felt moments of devastation, even betrayal or loss? The answer for me is yes. And you walked through my doorway at one of those moments of devastation in my life and feeling totally lost. And I'm going to let you tell the story that led up to that moment. Actually, before we look at that first picture. So tell me about the first time you heard about me.
Well, the very first time, and I'll preface this by saying that major influence in my life, as you know, has been Ram Dass. And in 1982, 81, I'm sorry, 1981, Ram Dass and I met at my father's condominium in Clearwater because Ram Dass was doing a tour of Florida, and it started in Tampa, which is right across the bay from Clearwater. So he came and stayed at my father's condo for a few days. And one of the stops on the tour was Unity of the Palm Beaches. Now, I was not familiar with the Unity Church, and I was looking at our itinerary before we embarked on the tour, and I suddenly looked up at him and I said, "There's a church that will have you as a presenter?" And he said, "Oh, yes." And he said, "You're really going to like that church." So we got there a few days later, and the ministers at the time, I think you knew, Hal and Lassie Rosencrantz.
I did know them.
Uh-huh. And they had, like you in Tustin, they had an extremely vibrant Unity community, huge congregation, a beautiful facility right next to the Intercoastal Waterway. And they were just the most lovely people. And when we left, I said, "You're right, I really like that church." So that was my introduction to the Unity Church. Now, my introduction to you came in 1997 or probably 98, when Ram Dass had had his stroke in 97, and he was needing financial support, and you came forward to invite him to do a benefit lecture at Unity of Tustin. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was the first official lecture that he gave after his stroke.
I think he had given one in Northern California that Roger Walsh had helped arrange. And I called Roger and said, we need to do one in Southern California.
Uh-huh. Well, that was so gracious of you, Marj, and it was really, when Ram Dass had the stroke, most of us thought he would never be able to teach again.
He thought that.
He thought that too, right? And you know, if I'm recalling correctly, one of the first things that came up, and I think you helped him with this, was that he was explaining before the lecture that sometimes he lost his words. You know, he would have lost.
Explaining before he said yes to coming to do the event. He
Uh-huh.
said, I really can't do this. You see, I need to tell you about aphasia.
Uh-huh.
And so he explained to me how there were moments where he would be talking and suddenly his mind would just dissolve in nothingness and he would go blank and he had no memory, no awareness. It was just gone into the void. And I said to Ram Dass, over the phone, I said, "Oh, that's not going to be a problem at Unity in Tustin. We know how to surf the silence. We do it all the time. We do long meditation retreats where we sit for an hour in the silence and we get the divine downloads. That won't be a problem here. Come and try it." And he,
Well, from that moment on, when he taught, he often would start by saying, explaining this to the audience, what he explained to you on the phone, and then he would say, "So if I go like this, that means we're going to surf the silence. I'm inviting you to surf the silence with me. So that was an extraordinary event, and I'm sure there are many stories connected with that that we might tell another time.
You
But
know, the one that I love so much from that event was it really put us on the map at Unity in Tustin.
uh-huh.
We had never had anyone, well, we had had Eckhart Tolle, who also helped put us on the map, but before he was famous. But Ram Dass coming and Krishna Das came with him, and uh, the event started at 7 o'clock at night. My son was doing technology and he wired the youth ministry room so we could set up a television feed in it, and it sold out. I mean, every seat and the ones right in front by Ram Dass sold for $100 a seat because it was 100% a benefit for Ram Dass. We took no money from any of the ticket sales. And it was one of the largest events we ever did. And as 9 o'clock approached, some people were used to us ending at 9 o'clock and had to work the next day, and people would leave some of the more expensive seats. And so people would leave early, and the people that were in the overflow room would let them know there were 4 seats available, five, one, two, and they would come in. The sanctuary stayed full until 11 o'clock at night. And then he said, I really would like to do some book signing. And we moved over to Victoria House, and he stayed and he signed books, intimate one-on-one conversations with people until 1 o'clock in the morning. It was exquisite. It was just amazing to watch him being filled with the Spirit and just coming alive in that radiance. So,
I know. I saw that many, many times. And one of the things that, since you brought that up, that really fascinated me was when I would visit him on Maui. He moved there in 2004 and lived there until he died in 2019. And he sometimes, because of the effects of the stroke and, his age, he had the stroke when he was 65. So it's sort of, by our standards today, kind of accelerated his aging process. But sometimes he'd come down in the morning for breakfast, and, he would sometimes have a difficult night. He would have pain, he would have, all sorts of issues going on. Not always, but every now and then. And he'd come down to breakfast, and, I could tell that he was not feeling well, and that he just kind of wanted to be quiet at breakfast. So we'd be quiet. We'd surf the silence and eat our cereal. And sometimes when that happened, someone might come over to the house to visit. He had sometimes people staying there on retreat in their, what's called in Hawaii, an ohana, which is the guest house, and they might come over to say hello. And Ram Dass would go from looking sort of pale and exhausted and weak. As soon as someone came in to see him, he'd be up, he'd be bright, he'd have color in his face, he'd be smiling, he'd be full of love. And I used to watch him and think, how does he do that? And yeah, he
it
was.
wasn't him, it was his essence.
That's right. That's right. And his mission, he was such a devoted teacher and devoted to his mission of teaching. And, when he was first sent back to the United States in 1967, he was with Maharaji in India. And Maharaji said he had to go back, and Ram Dass said, "You can't send me back to the United States. I'm too impure." And Maharaji called him over, and he looked at him, and he pulled on his beard, and he looked under Ram Dass's beard, and he looked up his nose, and he looked in his ears, and he had him open his mouth, and he looked down his throat, and he sat back, and Maharaji said, "I don't see any impurities." So he came back to the US, and his main prayer coming back here was that he not do anything to harm anyone in his teaching. And that was a level of sincerity that he maintained until he died. So anyway, you
Let's
had Ram Dass.
look at the first picture.
Oh, aha! That's Ram Dass, the road to Ram Dass's house in Hawaii, actually. So,
Show me the way.
so after you had him at Unity of Tustin, not long thereafter, I was in Long Beach doing a workshop, giving a workshop. And I had a day off, and I looked at the map, and I saw that Tustin was right nearby, and I thought, I'm going to go over to Unity of Tustin and check it out. And so I got there, and of course, it's a beautiful compound that the church exists in Unity of Tustin, surrounded by walls, and within is the extraordinary labyrinth and garden and the spiritual pathway that you and your son created. And so I walked through the gardens, and I just felt, ooh, this place feels really good. So I went to the bookstore and I said, is Reverend Britt here? And they said, yes, do you have an appointment with her? And I said, no. And they said, well, she's here, but she's tied up in meetings right now. So I said, well, that's fine. I just wanted to say hello. And so I left, and, I think they gave me your email address to send you an email. And
This is a really good example that I wanted to point out. Often there are points in time where we don't recognize it, or our gatekeepers don't recognize divine appointments arriving, and we miss it. It doesn't mean they won't ever happen again. It just means we missed one moment in time.
well,
That was our first miss.
Marj, I look at those things and I experience them as almost like laying a pipeline or a wire that connects us to these people that we're going to interact with later. When I look back at my life, I see so many times that I was in a place that geographically, didn't have any particular meaning for me, but later in life, I wound up back there and something big happened, or I met someone, so I think those are, like I was reflecting on my relationship with Ram Dass, and I was realizing that in 1961, I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I had this extraordinary feeling, which you were talking about, being called by the divine, I just felt something big going on. Well, that was when Ram Dass was a professor at Harvard. And we walked around Harvard, but we didn't go in for some reason. I was 12 years old, and the woman that was taking us on a tour, it was like, you can't go in Harvard. You can't go into Harvard Yard unless you're anointed.
Unless you have an appointment.
Right, that's right. So I just, forgot about it. And I was 12, so 7 years later, I was back in Cambridge. I had just moved to Boston. I'm walking past Harvard Yard, but still not going in, staying outside the fence. and I see on a telephone pole a poster of Ram Dass giving a lecture. And I look at it, it says Baba Ram Dass, lecturing somewhere, Arlington Street Church or Boston University or something. And I looked at him, it was the first time I'd ever seen a photo of him. I had no idea who he was, but I said, Baba Ram Dass. He's got an Indian name, but he doesn't look Indian. I think he's probably a charlatan. And I just kept walking. But that was another connection, another laying of the network of communication. So, um, so after I went to Unity of Tustin, I kind of, and I might have written you a note, or maybe I forgot. I don't know. So that would have been around 1998. Now, in somewhere around 2008 or 9, I believe, I was on Maui visiting Ram Dass. He had taken a group of us to the beach on Monday morning, which was his custom, and then he took us all out to lunch. And it happened to be Roger Walsh and Francis Vaughan and our dear friend Mary Omwake, who was the minister of the Unity Church on Maui, a very dear friend of Ram Dass and Wayne Dyer. So I'm sitting next to Mary at lunch, and she is talking with Ram Dass and Roger about you, and she said, let's call Marj. So she takes out her cell phone and she dials your number and she talks to you for a moment, and then she hands the phone to Ram Dass. And then she turns to me and she says, have you ever been to Marj's church in Tustin? And I said, no. I said, I visited once, but I've never spoken there. She says, you have to speak there.
Yes.
So then she takes the phone back at the end and she says, Marj, I'm sitting here next to John Welshons. He's a dear friend of Ram Dass's. I recommend you have him at your church. I'll have him get in touch. So that was the beginning of the real communication between us. And you finally set that up. And I arrived, it took a couple of years for it to come together, but finally, I believe it was January of 2012, I came for the first time to Unity of Tustin and to stay at your house when I came to speak.
And what you didn't know was that in 2011, a very dear, beloved friend of mine had died very unexpectedly. And I had found him. He lived in the desert, and I tried to call and tried to call, was expecting him to visit, and no answer, no answer. And I got the download that something was wrong. And I got in my son's car because I didn't have gas in my own, uh, and started driving the 100 miles. I stopped because I thought, uh, and tried to call again once because he would have, I thought, if I walk in and he's going to say, what are you doing here? I'm coming to the Tustin tomorrow. And I didn't want to appear overly caretaking or whatever, but no answer. So I drove on and found him. He had passed during the night, and I found him in his easy chair. The last thing he'd looked at on his computer was a 15-page email that I'd written to him at his request to answer the question, who are we? Was the last thing he had read. And we talked about it one time. He said, there's only one thing wrong. And he told me what it was. I immediately took it out. And then I found him. I was in immense grief. My left brain shut down. I could hardly think. It was like a total rewiring of my own brain. And that was during that time that I was trying to find my way that you showed up on my front porch and rang the doorbell to be a guest in my home. And we walked up the stairs to the guest bedroom, And right there by the guest bedroom door in plain sight was a book that was very meaningful to you. You remember?
I do very well. It was a book called God Speaks by Meher Baba.
And that was a sign to you, you told me.
Yeah. Yeah, that our friendship was blessed and our coming together was
Yes.
blessed. Yeah, yeah.
That we were divine um, connectors in a way that would benefit the world.
That's the hope. That's
Uh,
the hope.
and so, multiple realities existing simultaneously. They just reveal themselves in moments in time. And yet, all of it exists simultaneously, all at once. We just don't see it. I was so immersed in grief. I was totally, totally lost. And that's when Meath Conlon also came and said, "Oh, Marj, you're just in a womb house."
It's a great image.
So it's amazing how we have to go beyond our human minds and open to something that's so much vaster than we've ever experienced. And it is not only inviting it is saying, "You're coming, you're coming, understand it or not.
Yeah.
It's your time. It's your time to be in and live in and as this vastness." Mir Baba. And so your early visit at Unity in Tustin was one that was very, very special to me. The first time we co-taught together, and this was taken at one of the events in the workshop. And I love this picture. It's just one of my favorites of you and I together. My hair is gray now. It wasn't then. Oh, just so profound the way that spirit puts it all together. And yet you also had your moments of wondering. And so tell us about this picture. Now, see, we're doing this jump back and forth between timelessness and time. This picture reveals a moment when you were young, when you also had dark hair.
Uh-huh. And a lot more of it.
And tell us about that picture.
Well, that's an interesting picture that I just received about 6 months ago from Andrea Levine. And Andrea Levine was the wife of Stephen Levine, who for many years Ram Dass would have said he was Ram Dass's best friend and taught with Ram Dass. And Stephen was an amazing Buddhist meditation teacher who wound up studying with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and then she invited him to teach meditation at her dying retreats, people who were dying and people who were grieving. And Stephen became one of the most skilled counselors that I have ever encountered. So through Ram Dass, I met Stephen and later Andrea, and they invited me to help them set up workshops on the East Coast and retreats and so on. So we did things in New York City and New York State and Massachusetts and the Northeast, basically. That was a photo from a retreat that Stephen and Andrea gave at Brighton Bush in Oregon. And Brighton Bush Hot Springs, which is a wonderful retreat center. And I never saw that photograph until 6 months ago. It was taken in, I think it was June of 1985. And they had offered to have me come to the retreat as a participant rather than working at the retreat. And it was their gift to me. And it was an extraordinary experience. And so uh, Andrea, I guess, was going through some old photos recently, and that photo showed up on email, and she just wrote in the email, "Do you remember him?" Like, do I remember myself 40 years ago? 45 years ago? Yeah.
And so the years of our lives where we have wandered and wondered, I wonder as I wander. I think of that old Christmas song, I think it is. I
Uh-huh.
wonder as I wander out under the sky and the vastness of the all that is. And we're finding our way in ways that are unique and powerful and yet not always understood, and yet making these divine connections. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was just an immensely important teacher in my life,
Yeah, me too.
and just profound. And so you returned to Unity of Tustin many, many, many times, and you're still doing that, even though I'm no longer there. And and this is an example of you coming to Unity of Tustin, and you're sitting. I love this because the flame of the candle is just right behind, and you are revealing the light, and and um and I love that picture, even though you can't see the full picture. It's the descent of the dove. The dove representing the Holy Spirit descending as the soul ascends, ascent and ascending and descending. And one of the few places that I've been able to find these teachings of the descent of spirit is in Unity of Tustin, in the writings of Charles Fillmore. It's almost never taught in other places and classes and with people that I've taught, even very, very advanced teachers. Most of what they teach is about the ascent of of consciousness and how we go through levels of vibrational fields. But the descent is constantly occurring, just like the Kundalini. The Kundalini is descending at the same time that it is ascending. And when we really, in those glimpses, in those flashes of insight, in those moments in time where it's like, oh my God, and we realize that's what's happening to me. That is so, so significant. And so I I just want to tell you how much I have appreciated this divine connection that I know Spirit brought about in our lives together. We talked about part of this call would celebrate our friendship. Celebrate isn't a holy enough word. Uh, it's about totally honoring the Spirit descending and the connections that are part of God's plan, manifesting in your life and through your life and as your life. And that's in your life, John, as well as in my life. And I know that. And I'll never forget how I was having my first experience of channeling, although I would have never called it that. I was hearing the voice of my son and also my beloved friend that I'd known since I was a teenager. And I would simply ask questions and I don't know how to get through this. And and one of the um, humorous answers was my friend saying to me from the other side, how did this happen? You used to tell me about these things. How did it change? How did we change places? And so there's those times where we're learning together, whether we're on this side or the other side. And sometimes we listen, sometimes we don't. My son came to me one time after um, uh, the an experience and said, after his passing through the veils, and said, "Mom, tell Paul to listen to me. I'll teach you how." But he won't listen. And and he said, "Tell him that when I'm trying to talk to him, he'll recognize it's me because of my voice, the way I say it." Well, Bud had sort of a unique vocabulary. The way I say it, that's how he'll recognize me. And from then on, Paul listened.
Uh,
It's amazing. It Other people I've shared that with, and including a man, his name was Harry Smith, whose wife passed, whom he loved dearly, never did listen. He'd say, "I can't hear anything." And she would come to me and I'd say, and I'd tell him what she said to me. And he'd listen and say, "I don't hear that." So we never know. We never know it when it's our time to understand these multiple realities that exist simultaneously. And another time of wondering that you had, I know, and I just love this picture when you sent it to me. You talked about being out on the ocean in a vessel you didn't know exactly how to steer. And I thought it's the ocean of consciousness. And here you are,
um,
a
off the
young
coast of
man still
Florida.
being out on the ocean in a vessel you didn't know how to steer. Do you want to tell us about that picture?
Well, it was, um, I was in Florida with my beloved Maureen in, that would have been 1998, probably. Big year. That was the year that I first connected with you and you had robbed us at Unity of Tustin. So Maureen's father had been in a boating accident. He lived on his sailboat in Palm Beach. And it wasn't a boating accident so much as his stove exploded and set the whole boat on fire. And so he was burned over 85% of his body and had to be helicoptered to the burn unit at one of the big hospitals in Miami, which is famous for taking care of burn patients. And so he was now, this is 2 years later, now he was in a coma for 3 months and then came out of the coma. The fact that he didn't die, it was kind of like Ramdas in a sense, who by all reports from the medical community should have died from his stroke. Maureen's father should have died from his burns, but he was in a coma for 3 months, and then one day he woke up. And he wound up being basically fine, except that he had inhaled flame, apparently, in the fire, which had destroyed his ability to swallow. So he had to be fed through a feeding tube. Otherwise, he was in good shape. And oddly enough, the fire didn't touch his face, so there was no disfiguring of his face. Anyway, we were down visiting him at the Veterans Hospital in Palm Beach, and I had this idea that he might like to go out on a sailboat. I didn't know. I thought maybe that's the last thing he wants to do, but I had the thought and I said, "Would you like to go out sailing tomorrow?" And he thought about it and he said, "Yeah, I think I'd really like to do that." So we hired a sailboat and we went out in the ocean. The captain, I think, the guy that owned the boat, we realized was pretty hungover from the night before, and he just wanted to sleep. So he stretched out in the bow of the boat, or I don't even know what the bow and the stern is, but the back of the boat, the rear end. And I think that's the stern. And he went to sleep, and I'm there driving the boat, and I've never done that before. And after a while, it seemed pretty easy, so we had fun. It was an amazing day. It was an amazing day of transformation, and you're adding to it the image of being on the ocean steering a boat I didn't know how to steer. I just love. So I'm happy to have revisited that photo with you.
I love that awareness that right now, every single one of us are in that ocean of consciousness. When we really totally get it, we will realize that there is only one ocean. There's only one of us. I am you, you are me. I am Coral, Coral is you. I am Garth, Garth is me. Yehu, Jesus has joined us, by the way.
Lovely.
I love looking up on my names above the screen and seeing that Jesus is here. And I love that once we begin to recognize our oneness, we begin to realize that anytime we get triggered by someone, it's not about the other person, it's about us. It's about, oh my God, what did what just triggered me? What just happened? What wound do I still hold that is a trigger in my ocean that may be a rock that I run into? This ocean of consciousness that we don't know how to steer. So much of our awareness is underwater. So much we can't see what's under there. And, there's a whole exhibit in a museum here that's actually going to have to be moved because the lease is running out. But Carol Roman, who was the co-writer of those words to the song "Show Me the Way" with Amy John, Carol Roman wrote the words and or the music. She was here, and I said, "Tell me what you would like to see." And she said, "Well, I saw on the internet that there's this museum about this steamboat that went down in the Missouri River. I'd love to go see that."
Oh,
And we did. I'd never seen it. Ed and I used to park right in front of it and go to lunch next door.
huh.
We had no idea about what that was. And yet, when we went through it, they're still um, preserving the things that they brought up from that steamboat hitting buried limbs in the Missouri River. What buried limbs do we hit in our consciousness that maybe somebody said something to us when we were in our childhood? Or maybe somebody said something to us when we were in our middle years or later years. I thought Unity of Tustin was my heaven on earth. I absolutely loved every minute until it changed. after I resigned, not by them asking me to resign, by my own choice when I was um, in my 70s, and then all of a sudden it changed, and I no longer felt welcome. Those are wounds. They're holy wounds. And how do we heal those holy wounds that we often don't even know are there in order that our boat, our vessel, can sail the vastness of a river, our unique river, or the vastness of the ocean as you were in? So fascinating. I didn't know your father had a home in Clearwater. I used to go to Clearwater every year to celebrate my beloved Mary's 100th birthday.
Wow.
Was the last one she celebrated. But I went for 3 or 4 years and celebrated in her 80s Clearwater. Quite an amazing connection that we didn't even know we had. So you're mentioning Maureen, and I love this picture of you and Maureen and
Oh.
your beloved Maureen. You've been together for a lot of years.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, about Maureen.
Oh boy. That's not a whole show. That's a whole lifetime. But it was one of those moments. We met at a dinner party, and the host specifically chose us. It was like, 6 people having dinner together. And the host chose us because not she was trying to set us up, but that she thought we would have a good conversation. Because Maureen was a yoga teacher, and Maureen, when she was 14 years old, had done a whole study of Ram Dass. She was in junior high school. Her older sisters, had turned her on to Ram Dass. And she's very fond of Paramahansa Yogananda and Maharaji, Neem Karoli Baba. Just loved Ram Dass. So when we got to I had no idea that the host of the party had even thought out that Maureen and I should know each other. So I was just kind of, I think I probably wasn't even in the mood to be at a party that night. And I was introduced to Maureen, and she didn't seem the least bit interested in me. So I finally thought, well, I hope the food is good because she didn't seem to want to talk to me, and everybody else was involved with, had sort of separated into pairs and were just having long conversations. So I was eating the hors d'oeuvres and, just relaxing. Well, we started dinner, we sat down. She still didn't seem interested in me, and she was sitting right next to me. And I thought, okay, I'll just eat my dinner. And maybe about 10 minutes into sitting at the dining room table, she turned to me and she said, I understand you teach meditation. And I said, as a matter of fact, I do. So we started talking, and then somehow she mentioned that her father had been for a while a student of Swami Muktananda's. And I said, I met Swami Muktananda, and we started talking about that. And we had an experience that I sometimes call being in the divine bubble or the sacred bubble. So that we were sitting I was at the end of the table and she was on the corner of the table next to me. And we turned and looked into each other's eyes. And it was like the rest of the world fell away. And we were just two old, ancient friends meeting again. And it was just amazing. And got into this wonderful conversation that was so magical and lasted for a couple of hours that night, and now has gone on for almost 30 years. And we're still having an interesting conversation. So, and she was able in the latter years of Ram Dass being on Maui to come with me and visit with him and get to know him a bit, and it was such a treasure to her and so much fun to watch them interact. And so, as I said, I could go on and on, but that's Maureen. She is one of the most extraordinary human beings I've ever met, and I just feel incredibly honored to be with her. And she's one of those very special people who is extremely extraordinary and doesn't really know it. So she's very unique, and I adore her.
And you were recently with her in Southern California again, and it was her workshop that you went for. You were
Hmm.
just hanging out, coming along, and we talked while you were there. And you
Uh-huh.
were going to go see our beloved friend, Michael.
Michael Ward. Yes, yes. Who you introduced me to on the first night that we met. I arrived at your house and I was kind of tired from traveling, but you said, we're going to Long Beach to have dinner at my friend Michael Ward's house. And I thought, oh dear, I've got to go on a journey to Long Beach. And I said, how far is that? And she said, oh, we could be there in about 40 minutes. You drove us, and we had a wonderful conversation. That was the beginning of our long conversation. And Michael also has become a dear friend of mine, and it's been interesting to watch him. He retired from his role as one of the senior doctors for the Kaiser Medical Company. And so we got into this conversation in the coming months about what he was going to do when he retired. And, I was getting to know him, and I said, well, seems to me that you like to travel. And he said, yes. And I said, and where do you most like to travel? And he said, well, I love being in Assisi, where St. Francis was in Italy. Michael's a very devoted spiritual student. And he said, and I love to go to India. I said, well, you could spend part of your time in your retirement in Assisi and part of it in India. And that was what he started doing. And, I don't want to share too much of his story and steal his thunder, but it's been very interesting to watch what evolved in his life, facing the thing that so many people perceive as kind of the end of their useful existence, and I think he was feeling a bit of that, like, what do I do? I don't know what to do. I've always worked. I've always been a physician. I've always, I get up 5 o'clock in the morning and drive to the hospital. What do I do now? And he's had a very interesting and rich retirement, which has involved a lot of time in Assisi, and then he started focusing his time on India. He's a beautiful, beautiful soul, and now experiencing a time of really quieting and going within. And so I thank you not only for your delicious friendship, but for introducing me to Michael, who you feel like a spiritual sister to me. He feels like a spiritual brother.
And of course, Michael and I traveled all over the world together. We were in India together, we were in Egypt together, and Italy together, and different France together. And he was the one that said to me, where have you been in the world? And I said, oh, I've been to Mexico and Canada. And he said, that's not the world. And so I'm so grateful that you and Michael have made this deep, deep connection. I know he treasures your friendship as much as I do.
Uh,
And oh my. And another person I want you to talk about is Pat Rodegast.
Pat
And
Williams.
she was so important to me. Again, my first experience of being able to understand communication through the veils before I even believed in, quote, channeling. I'm not sure that um, um, uh, I still resist calling the kinds of things that I experience uh, as that because there are so many people who automatically say, "Oh, I don't believe that." And but however, when you begin to experience that kind of awareness, uh, it's profound. And tell us about Pat and your experience with her.
Well, again, my connection with Pat came through Ramdas. He had met her through a friend of his named Judith Stanton in New York City. And Pat lived in Westport, Connecticut, which was, probably a 45-minute to an hour drive from New York City. And when she was living there, she used to do readings and she channeled a being named Emmanuel. So some people who were listening may be familiar with Emmanuel's books. There were three books that were published. Emmanuel's book one, the first one was Emmanuel's book, and then Emmanuel's book two, and then Emmanuel's book three. One
And
of
the third one, I think, was The Choice is Love.
the choice to love, yeah. And like you, I was never very interested in channeling and, all that. Seemed a little woo-woo, I guess. And but Ramdas was so impressed by her, and he said, and Emmanuel's teachings that came through her, he said, I really loved it. And the first meeting he had with Emmanuel, he came up with a story that he loved to tell thereafter, which was that he asked Emmanuel, he said, Emmanuel, I deal with a lot of people who are dying. What should I tell them? And Emmanuel said, tell them it's absolutely safe. And he said, it's like taking off a tight shoe, especially when there's been pain in the body. And Ramdas just loved that answer. He said, how often do I get to talk to somebody who doesn't have a body, who can give me an answer like that? So during that time, this would have been, again, the early 80s, Ramdas was, he was so beautiful in the sense that he liked to make connections. He was a networker and he liked to make connections between people. And he was always talking to me about jobs he thought would be good for me. And then he finally said, you're really good at setting up workshops and lectures. Why don't you do that? He said, I have a lot of friends who need a good lecture agent, but a normal lecture agent doesn't know what to do with them. So he started introducing me to all of his friends, and one of them was Pat. And I went to meet her in Westport and became her first manager and road manager, setting up her first workshops. And it's an extraordinary experience. She herself was just this lovely, exceedingly normal Italian woman who loved pasta and red wine and loved having fun. She was elegant, radiant, charming, vivacious, just full of life. And then she would channel Emmanuel. And the way it worked for her was that she would go into a deep state of meditation and she would talk to him in her own being, and she would ask him questions, she'd hear his answers. Sometimes she would argue with him, while she was doing a reading. She'd say, well, Emmanuel, I don't know about that. He'd straighten her out. But it was just such a lovely experience of humanity invested with spirit because she, as Pat Rodegast, had nothing going. It wasn't like being with Ram Dass, who was always Ram Dass, although he did have a very human side. But Pat, unless she was channeling, it was Pat, and she was just this lovely, wonderful person. And whenever I said, can you talk to Emmanuel whenever you want to? She said, yeah, I just close my eyes and he's right here. And the thing that I loved most about Emmanuel's teachings was that he had this capacity, or has, I should say, because he's now being channeled by a fellow in England named Joe Clarkson. But he has this capacity to explain things from the soul's point of view. And we realize that we're always looking at things from our own mind, our own personality, our opinions, our history, our ideas. Emmanuel takes our life melodramas and turns them into, just think about what it is your soul is looking to experience. And, one of my favorite moments was a moment in Boston. We were doing a workshop at Arlington Street Church, and the room we were using was in the basement of the church, and it had it was like a theater, so it had a little stage at the front of this room. And we did a pre-registration. I think we had 45 people signed up for the workshop, and they all showed up, which was unusual. And they'd all checked in, and we sat down, and Pat began the workshop, channeling Emmanuel. And after about 5 or 10 minutes, the door opened, and this very disheveled-looking fellow walked in. And, I looked at him, and I thought, I don't think he's coming to an Emmanuel workshop. And, I kind of thought, well, what's going to happen here? Do I have to do something? And he came into the room, and he came over very quietly and gently, sat down on a chair right in front of me. When I realized that as he sat down, this cloud of alcohol fumes suffused the area around us. I thought, oh my goodness, I don't know who he is. I don't think he's supposed to be here, and he's drunk. So I said, oh dear, I'm the manager of the workshop. I have to spring into action. What do I do? Well, just about that moment, Pat would come to a moment in the workshop where she would open the floor up and just ask for anybody who had questions for Emmanuel, please, raise your hand and I'll call on you. He raises his hand. I'm sitting behind him. I'm trying to figure out how to tell her, no, don't call on him. He's not in the workshop. But she calls on him. And I think, well, this is going to be interesting. So his question that he asked so sweetly is, Emmanuel, can you please tell me how to recover from having been an alcoholic and having hurt so many people? That was it. And Emmanuel's answer, which I've said many times, I'll have to paraphrase a little bit, but he basically said, bless yourself, because you have chosen a path of great courage. You have chosen to, in this lifetime, see all of your darkness, or much of it. And he said, most human beings don't have the courage to do that. So instead of berating yourself, you could try blessing yourself and honoring yourself and seeing how courageous your soul is because you have volunteered to see all of this darkness that's in you. And he said, now that you've seen it, you can begin to take responsibility for your actions. And he said, responsibility is very helpful. Guilt is not helpful. And then he said, "You are a very blessed, blessed being." And when he finished, this fellow just started sobbing. And he still sat there quietly. Pat went on with, the other people in the workshop. At the break, when she took an intermission, the fellow got up out of his chair and practically ran to the front of the room where Pat was. And he said, "Lady, I don't know who you are, but no one has ever spoken to me with that degree of love and kindness." And so it turned out, as he got to talking to Pat, she told me later, he thought he was in the AA meeting, which was down the hall. So I don't know what happened to him after that, but I know that that moment really moved him in a way that he had never been moved and touched his heart in a way that it appeared it had never been touched. And, so that's why I loved working with Pat and with Emmanuel because, like being with Ram Dass, you could watch people just transform and their hearts open. And
And we have one more picture that I want you to talk about. We're coming back to Ram Dass.
okay,
And you and Ram Dass and the portrait behind.
Maharaji, Neem Karoli Baba, the guru that Ram Dass met in India in 1967, who has become an inspiration to so many of us. He died, or as I say in India, dropped his body in 1973. But he is a presence very much in our hearts, and he's just pure love, just pure love. Pure unconditional love is really what he represented. And he used to demonstrate that by making everybody know that he knew all the things that was in their minds, all of it. And he continued to love everybody. And, Ram Dass once expressed it like, I had so many secret places in me. This is Ram Dass speaking. But we all do, but he says, I had so many secret places in me that I thought if anyone else on earth knew them, they wouldn't love me. And he said, Maharaji knew them and he loved me. So it was that kind of transformation, again, like the fellow who came into the Emmanuel group who was filled with shame and guilt. And Emmanuel just said, why don't you come into love? That'll be the most healing thing. So,
Return,
pardon me?
return to love.
Return to love. Yeah, yeah. Come home.
Yeah. You know, it's just such a blessing to share this time with you. And we may go over a little bit so that people can ask questions. But before we do that, I want to, or share their own oh my God moments. I want to let you know that next month is my birthday. My birthday actually comes on Wednesday, April 15th. And so I'm going to have a very, very beautiful day. And Holly Wood, who uh, is Holly Woods, who is a dear friend for many, many years and has studied with a lot of the same people I have. I've endorsed her book. And by the way, John, thank you so much for your endorsement on my book. Um, you have a beautiful endorsement on the back of the book that was just profound for me. And there's another one actually inside, and where you talk about the poetry of what I write. And but Holly is going to be here, and as we've done today, gone sort of back and forth without either one of us being in charge, letting spirit direct it. Holly is going to play that role with me next month and ask me questions about my life. So um, I'm really looking forward to that birthday call on April 15th. And the other thing I love to mention is that Called by Love Institute is totally and completely supported by love offering donations. We're not at yet. We did it for 1 year, had some courses that we charged for. We've only been doing our monthly calls on a love offering basis for many years. And there's something in my heart that wants to keep it that way. So I invite you to, um, after the call is complete, to go to one of our pages and click for a donation. And then we'll go over just a few moments at least in case someone wants to share any of their oh my God moments. That happened to me. What has this meant to you? I love the authentic, real life stories that you can share about people you have known and have walked with in this amazing journey in spirit that you have taken. And I've had the great joy of sharing part of it with you and having the inspiration of your teachings and I'm so grateful for all of the people. What I see in this call is that you and I have both played roles of divine connector and connecting people who didn't know each other and inviting them and taking them into a higher expression in many ways. And it's fascinating to me that we're booking into late summer already. So with sometimes people calling me and saying, Marj, I want to be on your podcast. So one of the people that will be after she leads and co-leads with my birthday call, which will be about me, later in a couple of months, she's going to do a call which will be about her. And that will be fascinating. She has an amazing life, lives in Durango, Colorado now. And I'm really looking forward to the months ahead. And if there's anyone who has comments or questions that they would like to ask, or just, oh my God moments, I invite you to hold up your hand and we'll take a few of those. Uh, for as long as time allows. And we do have some people that have left comments in the chat. And Coral Rose, for example, said, what a beautiful afternoon with you, Marj and John. I need to sign off. I love um, the Michael stories, and I spent so much time with him in India. Much love to everyone. And Marj and Ed, I'll see you soon. She's coming up here to spend Easter week with me. And I am so delighted that we're going to be having that time together. We're still planning it. What will we do? And is there anyone that would like to raise their hand? You can do it this way, or you can do it by holding up your hand using the hand button below. Anyone that would like to share any thoughts or questions? All right, I, I see you. Come on.
Just say thank you.
And
Thank you
Anshu,
for
is that
sharing.
how you pronounce your name?
Yes, Mark. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing everything and the journeys. And I just want to say thanks.
Just a beautiful thing having you on the call, and you live in Irvine. Did you attend Unity of Tustin? And so,
Once in a while, yeah, and I'm on the mailing list. So yeah, got some of your services and keep going back for some occasional Wednesday meditations or whatever strikes me. That's of
You know,
interest.
it's quite amazing how spirit directs our lives, and we end up in places we never imagined. One of the interesting pieces that I'm looking forward to seeing is as Shara, who's one of the ministers at Unity in Tustin, now leaves her position there and becomes the director of ministries for Unity Worldwide. And she'll be in a very significant role and moving, of all things, to Kansas City. So at one point in time, I'm hoping she'll even come on the podcast and give her time to get settled and get started and get her feet wet, though, first. And um, anyone else? Hey, Sue. Jesus, would you be willing to come online? I was, I think I see that is, all I can see is Jesse. I think is Jesse, and that's, I'm assuming that that's you, but you're not raising your hand, so I won't call on you. And Ed, would you like to say hello to John? Ed, unmute yourself. Okay. Hello, Ed.
Hello. Hello. I got a thing here that says Zoom. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. I can't see you, but I can. I was got big letters in front of me. It says Zoom, so at least you can hear me. So yeah, really enjoyed hearing about your life and your experiences, and we all, of course, have those, and they're all very personal and very wonderful. And I enjoyed listening to yours, and a lot of us can, of course, relate to our lives in this very same fashion as you have.
Oh.
So good to hear and good to share, and thank you for that, and I appreciate that. So I don't know how I get out of the Zoom now, so I'm not, I'm
Once
not,
you get in,
oh,
you can't get out, Ed.
oh, yeah, that's right. That's the way life is. I don't want to get out of it.
Oh, right. That's the way the spiritual path is. You know, it's early on. A friend of mine who was an American, a Westerner, and he and I were in India together in 1973. His name was Jim Meyer, and he looked at me once and he said, "You know, once you get onto this path," he said, "getting off it is like trying to run with one foot nailed to the floor. You just keep going around in circles." So, but it's a blessing to be nailed to this floor.
Yes.
Yeah.
And and Ed and I are really looking forward to your coming and visiting us here at Holly. And hopefully that will be sooner rather than later. I know your sister in Topeka is waiting for that visit from you also. And And as you talk about that, I'm fascinated because I'm doing a, a week of mentoring calls with Sarah Landon right now. And as I talked to her about speed bumps, she said, and she channels the council, she said, well, it's not really speed bumps, Marge. It's like you have one foot on the gas and another on the brakes. And I laughed because people have said that to me when I'm driving
Uh,
and going down the road, and they watch me driving down the road with one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake. And they can see it in the taillights. So, isn't it true how we find our way in this lifetime? And John, it has been such a joy. I've loved every minute of it. We live in the same world and we live in different branches of the same tree. And I never have called you Ramadan. It's just like I never called David now. Swami beyond it. No, Swami Brahma.
Ramananda. So he's Brahmananda and I'm Ramananda. So we became Brahms and Rams. But to me, he's just David.
Yeah. And to me, he's just David. And to me, you're just John. And isn't it fascinating that those are both names of this disciples and biblical names? Um, it's ultimately one. We are one. And so thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, God, for these moments in time. Thank you for the surprises that we didn't anticipate. And thank you for the recall and the recording that will be going out to both John's list and my list as soon as possible. It's so beautiful for those of you who did get on. I'm so grateful for you. And so looking forward to uh, next month, which will be my birthday call. Happy birthday, Marj, 87 years. Oh my God. And so until then, sending you so much gratitude and deep, deep love.